I said I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all of this, eh?
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
When you see the same irrational arguments being made over and over, you have to wonder, what is wrong with these people? As discussed last week, this week we're going to go a bit more in-depth into lies used by feminist advocates to promote their narratives and their agenda. Why is addressing feminist lies so important? It's not just because someone is wrong on the internet, but because of how feminist organizations filter their male-demonizing lies through their grassroots to achieve their goals. Feminists in media and education spoon-feed their young charges false statistics, unsupported theory, and political rhetoric, making the movement a living propaganda machine wherein nobody involved is individually accountable for promoting falsehoods, a dishonesty laundering scam. Those influential few at the top feed their agenda into one end, and the response goes through the ranks to that grassroots who react with little understanding and less concern for the effects of their actions than how their ideology and their activism make them feel. The output is the promotion and spread of numerous logic fallacies that are then used to justify demand for anti-male discriminatory law, policy, and social standards. A logic fallacy is a common error in reasoning that undermines your logic, usually either because it is irrelevant or because it is not a legitimate argument, such that your conclusion is not actually established by the available information. The simplest name for this, when there is not another specific label to put on it, is the non sequitur, defined as a conclusion or statement that does not logically follow from the previous argument or statement. More involved forms of erroneous reasoning have their own labels, which are generally descriptive. When I said I was going to expand on this, one of our patrons drew my attention to a website, quackwatch.com, which discusses the use of fallacious logic in health fraud and quackery. The site describes quackery in terms of sharing misinformation, deliberately or not, in the promotion of false or unproven medical remedies. To me, the connection is pretty clear. The feminist movement, the grassroots of which is mostly clueless as to the agenda of its leadership, has engaged in a large-scale promotion of false or at least unproven assertions about social and legal issues, and on their basis, demanded equally false or unproven purported remedies. Feminism is human rights issues quackery. In terms of the ideology's character, this strain of dishonesty is a feature, not a bug, as their entire set of standards, beliefs, and principles is based on one of those unproven social claims: patriarchy theory. Feminism's concept of patriarchy is essentially of a system in which men have power that is denied to women. While feminists who write about patriarchy claim that there is no consensus on its definition, that description is a common factor in the various definitions given in academic feminist writing and reference material. When questioned about the validity of this theory, feminists argue a set of arguments in support of it that boil down to 1. Asserting that women's experience of intimate partner and sexual violence proves male domination. 2. Defining existing cooperative gender roles, rights of social organization, the division of labor, and communication as aspects of patriarchy. And 3. Asserting that positions of responsibility, labeled positions of power by feminists, being predominantly filled by men, proves male power. These arguments are all, on their own, non sequitur arguments, in that their conclusion in patriarchy theory does not follow. However, there is a more specific fallacy involved here. The first argument relies on ignoring the dynamics of intimate partner and sexual violence, which is perpetrated by both sexes and experienced by both sexes. The second relies on the assumption that individual aspects of society's development are all imposed on women against their will by men who have the power to override that will. For these things to actually be evidence validating patriarchy theory, feminists would have to provide solid, irrefutable proof that from these traditions' beginnings, men imposed them all on women against their will. Even if the dynamics exist, but are willingly promoted and enforced by both sexes, that does not lead to a conclusion that we live in a society in which men have power that is denied to women, as willing enforcement by women would be a function of female power. The third argument relies on cherry-picking which types of power to pay attention to in order to maintain the perception of male dominance, acknowledging only power feminists deem property of men to be dominating power, while avoiding acknowledgement of the social influence of women on law and policy. Men in positions of responsibility are, on the most basic level, beholden to female consumers and constituents. What are feminist counters to these points? They claim that intimate partner and sexual violence represents a gendered attack on women because women experience them under a patriarchal system. Asked to prove that traditional gender dynamics, stereotypes, and roles represent patriarchal control of women, they use their own disapproval of and beliefs about these traditions, combined with their existing presumption of male domination, as a reason to assume that is the case. They defend their cherry-picking of what types of power to acknowledge by describing women's social power as if it is tempered by patriarchal oppression. To simplify, feminists support their claim that women live under an oppressive patriarchal system by presenting as their evidence genderless experiences and cooperative social dynamics, which they present as gendered experiences and imposed social dynamics on the basis of the system for which they're being cited as evidence. Their fallacy is circular reasoning. Their conclusion is derived from a premise based on the conclusion, or in other words, their logic goes in a circle that ultimately relies on their belief in their conclusion as proof the conclusion is true. Countering this does not disprove patriarchy theory, but it does not have to. Patriarchy theory is a positive assertion. The burden of proof lies with the person advocating it. Rather, this renders it unproved and therefore ineligible to be used as a rational basis for any other feminist argument. For example, this would invalidate feminist use of the claim that women are uniquely vulnerable due to historical oppression as support for a demand that legal and social remedies for victims of intimate partner and sexual violence should be reserved strictly or mostly for female victims of male perpetrators. If it is not proved that women are oppressed and men are dominant, it's not proved that female victims of male perpetrators are more grievously impacted by these issues than male victims who also experience them, or than victims of female perpetrators. Therefore, society is not demonstrably justified in denying assistance to any one group of such victims for the purported benefit of any other group. These are the types of arguments that are needed in order to untangle the web of lies on which the greater feminist movement's quackery is based. And that act of holding the movement to account for its lies is an essential step toward legal and social reform. Popular opinion must change before society will support such reform, and before legislators will even consider it. Logic and reason are key to that change. It is because of this that HBR Talk will be going over some of the more prevalent feminist fallacies, the flaws in their logic, and how to counter their arguments and the lies on which they are based. It is time for an end to the quackery. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk number 22, Duck Duck Truth, Accountability Gap Clarified. I'm here with Woozle Slayer Karen Strawn and that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, to dismantle some social constructs feminists don't want broken down. Their talking points. Since the Women's March was this past weekend, we're going to... How did this start all over again?
But the senator, while in...
Sorry about that, guys.
Just to mess with you.
Yeah, no, see, with SciTube, if you set the second video to at end, it's not supposed to start over. Anyway.
It just does. It just does. Just live with it, Hannah.
I'm blaming Google because I've got it open in Chrome. It's all their fault. So anyway, we're gonna
blame
be going
Google.
over...
That's a good strategy.
Yeah. But yeah. This is fun. But we're going to be going over some of feminism's talking points, and in particular, we're going to look at the talking points that are laid out on the women's marches page, because they had their march this past week, and there are. What we'll do is we'll go through the one at a time. I'm going to read off the talking points one at a time, and we'll discuss each one before going on to the next one. And there's a bunch of them. So we may not get through all of it this week, but
probably
we'll get
won't,
through it.
knowing us.
Yeah, no, we won't get through the whole list in one show. But while the ladies of the weekend frolic in their pussy hats, badgers, on with your thinking caps. Grab your bullshit cutting shovels, and let's dig in. Beginning with the first talking point. The Women's March first talking point, they titled Ending Violence. But they're not talking about all violence. Their text under that heading says, "Women deserve to live full and healthy lives. We're free of all forms of violence against our bodies. We believe in accountability and justice in cases of police brutality and ending racial profiling," because, you know, racial profiling is all about women, "and targeting of communities of color. It is our moral imperative to dismantle the gender and racial inequities within the criminal justice system." So before we talk about the obvious exclusions regarding accountability and justice, I just have to point out the most famous incidents highlighted in media as cases of police brutality, particularly racially motivated or allegedly racially motivated police brutality, mostly involve actions against male suspects. So this is yet another example of feminists portraying women as the primary victims of an issue that primarily affects men, isn't it?
Well, yeah, by a pretty wide margin, if I'm not mistaken. Even Thunderfoot recently did a video on this that showed that I can't remember the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure that women violence against women, violence committed by women was in like the triple digits or something, compared to men being either in the mid 4 to 5 digits. There's no question that this is more commonly a thing that affects men, that men do to each other, that men have done against them. Like it's just obvious. So the fact that they're focusing on this one small slice of the pie just because it's against women, and then there's the whole, oh yeah, it's a racial thing. This is clearly related. We're just going to piggyback this on to make ourselves sound more, I don't know. I don't even know what the right word is, but
Progressive.
Yeah, basically, it certainly doesn't help their cause at all, because even that is a thing. It's primarily people of certain races go often after the same people in the same races. It's not a white cops versus black people thing like a lot of people are portraying it to be. It's unfortunately
it's not white on black racism.
No,
I mean, you look at so many of these like police shootings and these incidents that have been sort of used by race baiters. Some of them are actually, like I would say, what was it, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, right? Absolutely 100%. Like, there needs to be something done about situations like that. But just because, and with Eric Garner, yes, he was resisting, but the response was over the top. And there was video of him saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Right. So, I mean, so when you look at those incidents, Tamir Rice, I think that was an overreaction by the cops who responded. But at the same time, it really depends on the cop, and it also depends on the day. And does anyone remember that one incident where a white cop, there was a pool party that got crashed by a whole bunch of teenagers, and it was in a gated community, and the black family that was holding this party, they got overrun by all of these teenagers, and then the cops came in to disperse all of these teenagers, and there was this one girl who just absolutely refused to follow instructions. She like all of these boys lined up, sitting down with their hands behind their backs, behaving, right? But this one girl was just in the cop's face and yelling and getting physical and all of this. And one of these cops just he just was just like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna. I guess he just had enough, right? And he threw her onto the grass, and not onto the pavement, but onto the grass. And it was this huge racial incident because it was this white cop who had done this, right? But the things that this cop had been through already that day, which was dealing with a guy who had was threatening his family with a gun, and some other things that he had, like really awful things that he had been through already that day. And then he has this to deal with, and this 15 or 16-year-old girl is just absolutely, saying, I don't have to listen to you, fuck you, right? And so he throws her down on the grass. And I'm thinking to myself, when you look at what cops have to deal with sometimes, there needs to be a little bit of compassion and understanding for cops too. And frankly, with the whole racial thing and the race baiting that's surrounding this whole issue, there was a study that came out of University of Washington not too long ago, a couple of years ago, that found that when it comes to sending people, cops, military and civilians, into a simulator, a realistic simulator, they're more hesitant to shoot blacks than any other demographic, probably because there's so much attention on it and they don't want to appear racist. So they will hesitate before they and this is righteous shootings and wrongful shootings. They are more hesitant. They're more likely to shoot a white or Hispanic person than a black person in those simulators. So, and so many of the cops that do these shootings are black. So many of there are lots and lots of situations where you have in Baltimore, where half or more of the police force is black. The two top cops are black. The mayor is black. The city council is half black, right? And the attorney general and the they're black, right? And most of the population of the city is black, and somehow it's a matter of white on black racism. And I'm sorry, but it's really not. In some individual cases, yes, but it's not a systemic problem.
The area that I'm in had a few years ago an incident. There was a fellow at a Walmart, was on the phone with his fiance, and he's shopping, walking around, and he finds a pellet gun that he decides he wants to buy it, and he picks it up, and he's walking around the store with it, doing the rest of his shopping, and somebody had taken the pellet gun out of the package and left it on the shelf. So he was just carrying this pellet gun, and it was realistic looking. It looked like a real gun. And so another local panicked and called the cops, and he gave a bunch of information that was false. So the cops showed up thinking they were walking into an active shooting situation at the local Walmart.
I remember that.
And they got to the guy. They had been the 911 call that was recorded. The record showed that the caller said the guy had been pointing the gun at people. He hadn't been doing that. The video showed he didn't do that. The guy had been saying, "Oh, I think he's reloading." He was talking about shots being fired and everything. So they come in, and by the way, there was a customer who had a heart attack trying to get out of the store. There was that much panic just because this guy was walking around with this gun. But in any case, the cops show up and they ordered him to drop it. Well, he's on the phone. He's not paying attention to what's going on around him. It doesn't realize immediately the seriousness of the situation. Doesn't realize immediately what he's dealing with in terms of the cops, because he doesn't know he's been portrayed on the 911 call as an active shooter. So he doesn't see why they're yelling at him. And he looks at him and he says, "It's not real," which is not the thing you want to say to cops who think that you are an active shooter, because while he was trying to tell them it was a pellet gun, and they, from their perspective, that had to have sounded like, "Hey guys, I'm insane." And, and they shot him and he died. And the fortunate silver lining in this is that when Al Sharpton showed up in Beaver Creek, the people who were dealing with this as a racial incident, the people who were actually trying to go back and forth with the cops and the city and what happened and let's get to the bottom of this and all that, they basically said, "Fuck you, get out of here, we don't want you here," and he left. And that was the end of that. There was no national news story there for them. But Beaver Creek is
it did make national news.
It made national news, but it didn't make national news the way
Trayvon Martin did.
The way Trayvon Martin. Yeah. And see, that situation was portrayed very badly in the national news. I mean, in so many ways. Like, they decide a Latino guy is white now because the guy that he shot is black.
And they decide that it sounds German, right?
And it's apparently not self-defense now. If you are on your back, pinned on the ground, and somebody is on top of you, pounding your head into the ground, actively pounding your head into the ground, it's not self-defense to shoot in that situation. If the person is black that's doing it to you.
If the photos accompanying all the articles are of the 14-year-old Trayvon Martin rather than the Trayvon Martin that was on that guy,
and the situation was really, really dumb. I mean, this is a kid who, technically he wasn't a kid. I think he was an adult at that point, wasn't he?
18. Yeah.
Which to me is still a kid, but it's because I'm old. But in any case, this is a guy he's already got troubles. He's moved from his mom's house to his dad's neighborhood, to his dad's home, to deal with those troubles. And he's already, he's already having issues there too, because he's out at night after you would normally see somebody his age out and about that was not, up to something, regardless of their ethnic background. You usually, if they're out walking, an 18-year-old that late at night, either there's a parent with them, or they're snuck out to go do something, or they're unsupervised when they shouldn't be unsupervised. In any case, he was goofing off and running up into people's yards and looking in windows and everything, and he's got this guy following him, and he calls, I guess, his stepmom, his dad's girlfriend, to tell her, hey, this is happening and I'm worried. And she testified in court that she said to him, "Oh, that guy's gay and he's going to rape you." So she didn't make the situation better. Like, if I had let my 18-year-old son, walk down to the convenience store down the street from where I live, it's like 4 blocks. I used to work there, and I walked there at 4 o'clock in the morning, but I still wouldn't let my kid walk there by himself, right? And if I did, though, and he called me and said somebody's following me, as much as I would hate to let go of the connection, I would have said, "Get off the phone with me and call 911 right now." And I'd have been off the phone and in the car. I wouldn't have said, "Oh, he's gay and he's going to rape you," even if I had that belief, right? Even if I thought that was the case, that would not have been, that'd have been the last thing I'd have said. So then she had basically encouraged him to turn around and attack. And that is why he did it. He didn't turn around and attack because he got it all in his head that there's another guy out here, I'm just going to attack him. He did it because his fear of the situation was exacerbated, and his dysfunctional handling of the situation was exacerbated, and by, in my opinion, an idiot woman.
Yeah.
And
But
I'm sorry, but that kid is dead in large part because an adult he depended on to take care of him gave him the worst possible advice in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. And you notice in all of these scenarios that we've been talking about, the gender of the person who is being shot or is being attacked by
As a guy.
police for whatever reason. Yeah, it's men. It's always men. So why the hell is this mission statement page so focused on women when they are such a small slice of all of the shooting victims?
Well, it's not always men, but it's so predominantly male. I think that in terms of shootings and stuff, incidents of police using force, sometimes deadly force, where there needs to be an investigation. That's even the male to female ratio is even higher than the male to female ratio of people in prison.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and then this statement, to read it again, the beginning of it again, just this hits me. Women deserve to live full and healthy lives, not people deserve to live full and healthy lives, because they know men are not going to live full and healthy lives in the terms that they are describing, free of all forms of violence against our bodies. Okay, women experience the least amount of violence against their bodies of the three groups: men, women, and children. Children experience more violence against their bodies than women do, because children don't have bodily autonomy. And if you count the fact that in the United States, it's pretty standard for infant boys to be circumcised at birth, that's extreme violence, in my opinion, because they're having a part of their body cut off without anesthetic unnecessarily. They're not even given a chance to consent. They're infants. Consent or deny their infants, and the amount of apparent suffering that takes place. If you have ever seen, there's an actual video of a demonstration of a circumcision, which I have seen more than once, because in circumcision discussions it comes up a lot, and the scream that the child lets out just makes me want to punch someone. It's I can't even talk about it without getting angry that somebody does this professionally to children and experiences the sound of that scream over and over again and wants to do it again to another child. It's bad enough to do it once and not realize what a horrible thing it is, but to do it over and over again to children and not, that's extreme violence. Yes, rape happens. Yes, domestic violence happens to both sexes. And it's not violence to discuss women's reproductive rights in terms of all of the factors involved, including the fact that when we are considering abortion, we are considering two uniquely distinct from each other life forms, two human life forms, not just the woman. That's not violence. But what men and children go through in terms of their bodily autonomy being violated, I would say that it is in if women want to consider, and I know that feminists do consider limitations on abortion to be a form of violence, because I've had them tell me that. If that is a form of violence, then so is mandatory child support. And what do you call it when you can order somebody, not request, but order somebody to earn a particular amount of money, which means they have to go to work whether they want to or not, they have to have a job whether they want to or not, when you can impute income higher than that they make and order them to work more for the benefit of another person. Someone who can be compelled to labor for the benefit of another person. What is the noun that we use to label that description? Isn't it
Well,
slavery?
that would be slave.
Yeah. So, and there is force involved. If you don't comply, you go to jail. If you don't comply to the tune of, I think it's $10,000 debt at this point. I know the National Organization for Women attempted to have it reduced to $5,000, which anybody in the middle class would be at felony level then, if I understand correctly, just from our experience at my house, within a couple of months of unemployment, getting laid off and not being able to get another job. And that was during the Obama end of the Bush-Obama recession. So it was at the worst part where everything had fallen apart and we were all trying to pick up the pieces. We had here in the Dayton area, we'd had like 5 factories shut down in the space of 2 years. And National Organization for Women is going, well, it should be a felony and you should have to go to prison if you get $5,000 in debt from your child support. And judges are allowed to tell men that they need to earn the money they were earning before they got laid off, even if they can't find another job, That's not violence, but telling a woman that you can't kill a fully formed baby during the 3rd term of your pregnancy is, bullshit.
It's pretty ridiculous. The whole idea, and I'm going to say it yet again, if just for the hell of it, I decided to go to your house, Hannah, drag you out of there by your wrists, tie them together, and lock you in the tool shed for a few days for no apparent reason, or for some reason that I couldn't justify legally, that would be considered violence. A whole host of violent felonies: kidnapping, illegal forcible confinement, forcible restraint, assault and battery, right? That's what I would have done to you. So I think it would serve people to consider, because we have this view that whatever the actions of the law, barring physical, like severe physical beatings and shootings and stuff like that, that if someone has made a complaint or if there is some reason to arrest someone, and lock them up, and until they post bail and all of those things, right? That this is it's legitimated simply because it's non-violent. Well, it wouldn't be considered non-violent if an ordinary citizen did it to somebody else.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep. It's something that should definitely be reserved only in situations where we're trying to prevent violence, where we're trying to prevent an actual crime. And I'm not saying that men shouldn't support their kids. I'm not saying that dads shouldn't be as responsible as any parent, whether they're married or not. And what I'm saying is the state shouldn't be getting involved. This is not something that. And honestly, if the state didn't get involved, I don't believe that we would have the epidemic, and it is an epidemic because it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. The epidemic of single custodial impoverished motherhood by choice that we have today. I think if women couldn't exploit state power to enslave the fathers of their children for child support while still getting welfare, and no social repercussions, no legal repercussions, no nothing for putting their children in that situation, I don't think there would be nearly as many women who were careless with their birth control and careless with who they choose to sleep with, and careless with all of those factors, because there weren't that many when the state wasn't so dramatically involved, and when birth control wasn't so widely available, and when society wasn't allowed to judge when you do shit like that.
Yeah, funny enough, you incentivize bad behavior, then
it
you'd wonder why it becomes more common.
and I don't think that there would be so many men who were accused of being deadbeats either. Not just because people wouldn't judge if men walked away, but because if women were more careful who they screwed around with, and actually picked men who wanted to partner with them and father their children and bring them up together instead, they wouldn't be in that situation.
Well, I think too, there's something to be said for giving a man a status within the family that actually means something.
Yeah.
And so I think that even men who, in a different set of circumstances would be willing to say, okay, I'm going to stick by you. We're going to do this. Okay, here's a shotgun wedding, blah, 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 or I'll make an honest woman out of you or whatever. And we'll deal with this. And those were still fairly common in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s. Men who stepped up and said, okay, well, you're pregnant. Let's get married. Let's do this right. Okay, well, it's because there was something in there for him other than just obligation, right? And so it was, and he wasn't partnering with somebody who had all of the cards in her hand, right? And that's really what's being asked right now is, like the mandatory state-enforced child support is actually the least worst option for those guys in terms of what they can expect, because oh yeah, you can marry her and then in 4 years she can divorce you, and you've just put in all these 4 years and you put in all this emotional investment in this child, and you've bought her a house and you've worked really hard, and she divorces you, she takes everything, and you're in the exact same fucking position, only worse than you would have been if you just said fuck it and allowed them to garnish your checks.
Yeah.
When she told you she was pregnant.
I think there's another factor involved there. You have the situation where we don't see society treating fathers with the respect that fathers deserve. And fathers deserve a hell of a lot of respect. All of the respect that society, all of the worship, really, that society has for mothers, fathers deserve an equal amount there. In fact, I think
definitely.
Society goes a little overboard with mothers. Like, I'm not saying that we don't do something very important. We do, and it's very hard and very intimidating because you're responsible for an entire person's whole welfare, and their whole start in life and everything. But so are fathers. And on top of that, they're responsible for their entire family's welfare. It's all on their shoulders. Society puts it all on their shoulders. They take it all onto themselves and put it all on their shoulders. And then people turn around and all they have to have is one moment of weakness, or one moment where their decision making isn't up to society standards or the mother's standards or just some stupid bystander's standards. Or be at the park with their kid and have somebody not recognize that since they look exactly alike, except separated by several years, they might be related, and call the cops and accuse the father of being a pedophile. These are all things, it's absolutely ridiculous the way fathers are treated. So, yeah, they don't get the respect they deserve, and they don't get the kudos they deserve for what they do in society. But on top of that, and they do get treated like they're not doing what they do. That's the other thing that's really stupid. We now see all kinds of ads, right? That, oh, be a dad. He's already doing it. But the other end of it is, you partner up with a woman, you get married, you have your kids together. Maybe not necessarily in that order, but so what? All right, you're together. That woman, your partner, your wife, the person who is supposed to be the other half of a dedicated relationship, isn't expected to actually be dedicated at all. That's wrong. Your whole relationship is based on, if it's based on loving each other, then it's based on being invested in each other's welfare. It's based. I say this all the time. When a man basically decides to dedicate himself to a woman, he starts making sacrifices left and right. And I've seen this over and over again. Just in dating, I've seen this over and over again. Women aren't expected to do that, and they don't grow up believing that they have to. They don't grow up believing that it's part of their end of a relationship. And what we end up with then is a partnership that isn't really a partnership. It's a man taking on responsibility for a woman and their children, or even her children with another guy, and a woman getting a free ride from some guy who she has sex with. That's not a relationship. And it's not gonna last. And it's probably part of the reason why women outlive men, because the difference in the degree of consideration and the reduction you get in your stress from the relationship being a safe haven and so on is dramatic under that circumstance. And
gosh, probably...
honestly, I think there would be a dramatic change in the number of broken homes if we just got back to a point where we as a society expect both sides of a committed relationship, whether you use marriage, whether you use shacking up together, whatever you want to call it, both sides of a committed relationship actually being expected to commit to each other, be invested in each other's welfare, be faithful to each other, give a shit what happens to each other, want good things for each other, hold each other up and support each other. If we did that, if we made that the standard again, I don't think we would see so many incidents of women walking out of marriages. I don't think we would see so many incidents of women never getting married and having children. There would not be anywhere near the percentage of society that is made up of broken homes that there is today.
Well, there's not that kind of appreciation of that sort of loving relationship these days. I mean, you still see it, of course. Like, you still see people being like, oh, they lived happily ever after, but it doesn't seem like it's held up as much as it used to be. It's not like the goal to be married and have children. Now it's like, oh yeah, you can get married and whatever, you can toss it aside if you're unhappy with it, and then you can take him for all he's worth, because why not? And it doesn't matter if the relationship is the best scenario to raise children in. If children do better with both their mother and their father, it doesn't matter if fathers if men in happy committed relationships tend to be healthier and live longer lives. No, none of that matters. Now it's all about, selfish goals. Do whatever you want to do. You go, girl. You don't have to be beholden to anybody. You don't have to be held up to any of these responsibilities. It's not necessary. Do whatever you want.
Well, I think what's really actually happening in a lot of these cases is that women want weddings, not marriages.
Yes.
And they want what happens. They want the end of the romance novel. They don't want the next 20 to 50 years that doesn't get written about. And the sad fact of life, and it is sad, is that there are very, very, very few people, and they have very particularly wired brains, who actually feel those butterflies in their stomach, that feeling that you get when you're falling in love with someone, right? When you are falling, not when you are in love with someone, not when you love someone, but when you are falling. There are a few people out there, very, very small percentage, who manage to maintain that throughout long-term relationships 30 years later. And they're like, I still get that feeling, that rush when he walks in a room. It's like amazing, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
Very, very small percentage of the population whose brains are wired extremely differently than the rest of us. The rest of us, we grow old together like two fucking worn out slippers, right? That are really, really comfy and sometimes annoying because they got holes in them and whatever, but, or they smell. But essentially, you have to, in a long-term relationship, transition between that hyper intense state of affairs that occurs at the beginning, right, into something that's much more calm. And they've done research. They put people in MRIs and showed them very, very quickly just random photos, but also in the midst of all those photos was a picture that would show up for like a tenth of a second or whatever of the person that they said was the one that they're going to spend the rest of their lives with. And when the person who said that had only met that other person, a few 6 months ago or less, right? There was a part of their brain that just like fired up that is all hooked into addiction, right? This part of their brain is all about addiction. It's all about heroin and cocaine and opioids and and fentanyl and alcohol and smoking and any kind of addictive behavior. That's the part of the brain that lights right up. It's dopamine and all of this other stuff, right? But when it was 20 years down the road and this person is talking about, yes, this person that I'm with and I've been with for 20 years, this is the one, and they see that picture, the part of their brain that fires up is the part to do with compassion, right? And empathy. And that is the transition that I think a lot of women have been led to believe is the transition into eternal boredom. No, it's the transition into something beautiful. You don't read some romance novels if you're starving for that kind of feeling, that kind of intensity. There's plenty of ways that you can sort of do that vicariously without abandoning somebody that you feel genuine compassion for. It's like, it's very frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, honestly, I get the feeling that you were talking about before, where I see my husband and I still get those butterflies, and like we're kind of being lame in our chat right now. We're just kind of waxing poetic about the things that our significant others do that make us still happy. And I get that that's not the way it works for a lot of people. For a lot of people, you have to work at it, but a lot of people just aren't willing to put in that kind of work these days. You also see it in the way people are talking about having children. It's like, no, I don't want to give up everything that I have. I don't want to give up my free time. I don't want to give up all of these things that I can do to have children. I think that a lot of people right now are just in this momentary, I have to be getting momentary pleasure, otherwise it's just not worth it. You see that in the way that some feminists will use the term emotional labor to talk about doing basic chores or anything that they have to do in life that makes them feel maybe not fully joyful in that one moment. All of a sudden it's like, oh no, this is terrible. I must be always happy at all given times. Otherwise, it's a tragedy.
I totally copied your emotional labor in my last video.
I'm so stoked that was based on my stuff. I was wondering if it was.
Yeah, no, it totally was. I was like, oh, emotional labor. Because what a fucking 90% of the emotional labor women do is shit that men wouldn't want done anyway, like sending Christmas cards to 4,000 of your closest friends, handwritten. Who does that? I don't do that. I don't even send Christmas cards to my own fucking family.
Yeah.
Ladies out there in the audience, if you want some emotional labor, be the person who gets woke up in the middle of the night and told to go downstairs with a baseball bat because your wife heard a noise. Okay? Be the person who is taught from the time of toddlerhood that the opposite sex goes first. That if you're going through a door and you're with your sister, the person of the opposite sex, so it would be your brother, that it's your job to open the door so that he doesn't have to. Imagine being told that it's your job to walk on the curb side of the street to protect whatever person of the opposite sex is with you, regardless of what type of relationship you're in with that person. Imagine if it was your job to be the person aware of your surroundings at all times, not just for your own safety, but for the safety of your significant other or any person of the opposite sex that was in your presence at any time. Imagine if you knew that just, walking down the street with a group of your friends, that if somebody else, some complete stranger, not part of the situation, came along and hurt one of your friends of the opposite sex, people would judge you based on whether or not you attempted to protect that person, regardless of the situation, regardless of the danger level, and regardless of whether or not you have any reason to be invested in that person's welfare more than you are in your own. You go through your whole life being expected to make little tiny sacrifices and great big sacrifices, and constantly be aware of the expectation that you make those sacrifices. You're going to tell me that you're upset about sending out Christmas cards that were your idea, not his idea. You might want to start appreciating all of the various ways in which he is expected by society to accommodate you. If he's not in a relationship with you.
Yeah, the quintessential article on emotional labor was a Jessica Valenti article complaining that her husband doesn't do anything to help her prepare for Christmas. And she said that she actually said in the article that he always offers, but she always tells him no because he'd fuck it up. He'd fuck it up. The shopping, he wouldn't get the proper gifts for everybody. He'd buy cookies with walnuts for the family that has the kid who's allergic to walnuts, right? She couldn't trust him to do it right. And he'd offered to help wrap the stuff, and she's like, you won't do it right. It needs to be just so, needs to be perfect, and you put too much tape on, and so fuck you, no. Yeah. But I'm still gonna write an article in a national fucking newspaper that has international reach about how you suck because I'm stuck doing all this shit.
Yeah, right? Well, and it's so stupid because, you can just, if you're really, really that insistent on it being done in a certain way, it's not hard to be like, hey, here's how I do it. This is the reason why I do it this way. I would appreciate it if you did it this way also. Or, you could learn to loosen the reins a bit and kind of realize that if he doesn't do it exactly to your specifications, it's probably not completely ruined. But either way, you could find a compromise. But no, these guys don't want compromise. They want it their way or the highway. And if you don't want to do it that way, then you can get the hell out and let me bitch about my emotional labor that you put on me all the time.
And I think in terms of emotional labor, I think we've basically talked the ending violence thing to death. It's pretty obvious that it's not just fallacious, to say that this talking point itself, I should say, they don't come out and say it per se, but they talk about violence as though it's something that is unique to women or is unique when women experience it, and it's not. They talk about a right to be free of all forms of violence against our bodies. Like what other kind of violence? I know
it's
that there
violence
is abuse
against our feelings.
I know there's abuse against your psychological state, but I can't classify that necessarily as violence unless
violence.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless that abuse results in a person committing suicide because of the violence, because of the degree of abuse that takes place, and then that's their only escape from it, or that they've been brainwashed into it, and that takes a lot. But in any case, I think that we've hit a few fallacies here, but this is obviously, for the most part, a fallacious appeal to emotion. It's all pity us, poor us. We have it worst in these circumstances that affect everybody. It's looking at only part of the picture, and basically exaggerating things that are just that part of the picture, as if they're bigger than the rest of the picture, in order to single them out as being uniquely deserving of remedy. So there's a whole lot there that is just, it's absolute bullshit. And I think the argument against it is you can't deal with violence in society in a way that actually would reduce that violence and would benefit the public, benefit all of the people that experience it, unless you do look at the bigger picture, the various causes of violence, how it's experienced, and how it's perpetrated and why. What are the dynamics of it? So this is actually not helpful at all. This ending violence talking point. In fact, it's a detriment.
It is.
So
it's especially detriment because the sort of the general attitudes of society toward male violence against women, like that the feminists want us to believe are normative values, right? They're normative attitudes. About 2% of, actually just slightly under 1.8% of Americans in a nationally representative sample said that they felt like it would be sometimes okay for a man to hit his wife to keep her in line. And about 5% of both men and women said that the opposite was the case. It would be sometimes all right, it would be sometimes okay for a woman to hit her husband to keep him in line. Okay, but neither of those actually meet the 6% threshold that Dr. Dawn Dutton uses at UBC, which is 6% of Americans sincerely believe that they have been abducted by aliens. And so if 6% of Americans believing that they have been abducted by aliens is not a normative cultural attitude or belief, then how can we say that 1.8% of men and women in America thinking that it's sometimes okay to hit your wife to keep her in line is a normative value?
Yeah, it's quite obviously not. I'm surprised actually that only 5% said the reverse, because I know,
well, it was,
like, if
it
you
was
look
about,
at it,
it was about 5% when you averaged out men and women.
Yeah.
Men answered lower
of course,
to that question than women did. So
very, very, very few people in the world are going to say, yeah, I should be hit by my spouse to be kept in line. I mean, nobody's gonna that's sure, let's go ahead and do that. But the fact is that society pretty much tolerates it under certain circumstances when a woman does it. And I mean, that the scenario I used in discussing female violence as society's blind spot, they don't think of it as hitting someone to keep him in line necessarily, I suppose, if he says something really derogatory or degrading, and she slaps him. They would think of it the other way around,
Yeah,
if
they
a woman
think
said
he's the
something
aggressor.
degrading,
Yeah.
and sexually explicit to a guy, maybe turned around and disparaged the size of his genitalia and went on and on about it or something until he slapped her. Immediately everybody would say, well, he's the abuser, and they might not even recognize that what she was doing was abuse as well. They would simply recognize that his escalation of it was wrong. They wouldn't, and the other way around, if he was turning around and your cunt stinks, and all he'd have to do is say it once, and if she smacked him for it, people would not recognize that
They would think she was justified.
Yeah, they wouldn't recognize that she had just escalated verbal abuse to violence, to physical violence, and that's equally wrong. It's the same situation. It's the same disparaging the genitalia in an embarrassing way, in a degrading way, and yet, you know, the slap doesn't mean the same thing to people. That's very typical of our societies. I'm really surprised to hear we didn't get more women going, yeah, I'm entitled, because I hear that from women all the time. You know, and I don't care what shit you say. I'm not going to hit somebody for saying something I don't like. Even if it's abusive, I might turn around and say, you know, that's abusive, fuck you, but I'm not going to hit him. It's not justified. And if they try to hit me, I might hit back, you know, or I might run away if they're a lot bigger and stronger. But the idea of turning around and hitting somebody because they said something you don't like, it's just absolutely alien and ridiculous. And I don't know. I guess that's my perspective on that. It strikes me as, I think I would bet if people honestly assessed their attitudes towards men and women, you would see a statistic that was much higher in terms of accepting that particular area of violence. But of course, like the talking point says, women deserve to live full and healthy lives free of all forms of violence against our bodies. So going on, I'm going to read our multitude of super chats here, and then if we can, we might start on the next talking point.
We kind of already did a little bit.
Yeah, we've got some things. Yeah, we've got some things we've already said on reproductive rights. But let's start with Chris Stewart here, who has a multi-part super chat here. So he gave us $10 for part 1 and says, in your intro, Hannah, you present a definition of patriarchy that disqualifies any system that has any female approval from that definition. How stringent are you with that definition? And then part 2 says, because as a bit of a kinkster, I've encountered many subwomen who seem to desperately want to bring back the patriarchy that the feminists always talk about.
Yeah, they want to bottom from the fucking, they want to top from the bottom is what they want to do, just like in old school patriarchy, top from the fucking bottom.
Are they by definition?
No, I don't have any power except for, like, I can make you do shit.
Right. Are they, by definition, unable to actually want this? Well, the first thing I will say is the definition I presented of patriarchy is a result of my research on feminist writing on patriarchy. Every place I've seen it, the gist of what they have written boils down to that system under which men have power that is denied to women. That is the very basic. If you extract from all feminist talk about patriarchy, that is the essence of their discussion.
It's all the men hold the power.
Yeah,
men hold power, and women are largely excluded from it.
Right.
Yeah,
and they won't
and if
say
you see
it.
People,
they won't say it explicitly. And if you say it explicitly, they'll say, "Oh no, that's not the definition of patriarchy," and then they will go.
It's the definition on Wikipedia.
Right, they'll go through a 10-page dissertation, talking all the way around it, establishing it without using those words, and then tell you that's not the definition of patriarchy in Wikipedia, which is written by women who are feminists through Wiki Project Feminism. It's full of shit. So and
you see people who actually believe in that definition. The way they talk about it, it's just ridiculous, because they talk about it as though it's unquestionable, as though there's no debate that men have all the power and women don't. And even if you try and present arguments against that, such as the fact that more women are going to and graduating from university, they're just like, oh, well, you know, I mean, I guess maybe some women might have a bit of an advantage, but it's still men that have the power, though. And just because there might be a couple of women doing a little bit better here, that doesn't matter, because it's still men overall who have the power. And you can try and point out other ways, but they'll still find ways to deflect it. It's kind of strange arguing with somebody who holds these beliefs so strongly.
What I found to be, like, so telling was I think it was in I forget where it was, Norwich, in the UK at a red pill screening, and Mike Buchanan was sitting. They were doing a question and answer, and they had a couple of feminists there who were willing to actually do a question and answer session. And Mike Buchanan asked them how they could justify their belief in patriarchy as a system where men hold power and use that power to privilege other men when you think about the sentencing gap. And then he brought up the sentencing gap. And the response, the answer from these feminists was, well, it's not women doing that. It's men. And he's like, yeah, it's men
women doing
who are
that.
doing that. Like, so how can you, like, seriously, like, you're answering a question that I didn't ask. Because I didn't ask you, you know, how can you say there's a patriarchy when women are oppressing men? What I asked you was, how can you justify your belief in a patriarchy where men privilege each other at the expense of women when this phenomenon is so systemic, right? And immediately she jumps to this idea that he's accusing women of oppressing men, and she's like, well, most judges are men, they're not women, so it's not women doing it. So question answered, and it's like, no, it's not.
Yeah, that isn't an answer, and it is to a degree women doing it,
and
especially
it is,
in the UK, where feminists have been
but
actively
it's also
fighting.
It's also a rebuttal of her saying that.
Right.
Is a rebuttal of the entire concept of patriarchy as she believes in it.
Right, and that is, it's a rebuttal, but it is women doing it. Feminists in the UK have been fighting tooth and nail to widen the sentencing gap.
The sentencing gap
not just the sentencing
without
gap, but
that,
the incarceration gap, because there's a sentencing gap in which, you know, it's different sentences are given depending on gender, but there's also an incarceration gap in which how much of the sentence you serve and what type of
sentence you get,
sentence you
custodial or community or fine or
So even if you get the same number of years of punishment, the type of punishment, the type of facility that you're put into, the results of you ending up in that facility. Now in the U.S., there's a difference there that I don't think is the same in the UK. In the U.S., men are at high risk, particularly minority men are at high risk of ending up labeled gang members or otherwise the worst of the worst in the prison system for minor infractions. Like there was one instance I keep bringing up of a guy who was labeled a gang member because he had a coffee mug or something with a dragon on it. And there's a gang called the Dragons. There's also been men who have been labeled problematic and put into, they get put into solitary confinement for this shit. Labeled problematic because they read books on racial inequality written by the wrong authors in terms of the prison authorities' opinions on which books they should be reading, and they get put in solitary. Women do not get put in solitary at the rate that men do. In fact, it's a very rare thing in terms of women's prison experience, even when you're talking about the worst of the worst. It's a common thing. It's all too common in terms of male experiences, and it actually makes things worse. So this idea that and of course, feminists have been fighting tooth and nail to not to help men in those situations, but to further demonize men as being the violent gender and the gender that needs this stuff, whereas they want women to get therapy and they want women to get rehabilitative treatment. They want women to get second chances. They want women to be in lower security facilities and so on. And they may be right about what they're asking for, but they're wrong about gendering those requests. So, but to move on, because
what I find, I just want to make a very brief comment, like when it comes to patriarchy and matriarchy, right? You know, like patriarchy privileges women, but at least it considers men, right? It considers men useful. It considers men a group that needs to at least be addressed because, you know, they're useful and they're necessary, right? Whereas matriarchy, like, so the whole idea that patriarchy oppresses women. I have to see that as protection. I have to see that as what these feminists would do to the opposite sex if they were in power.
Yeah.
Right? It's not what men do, right? But it's what these feminists would do to men if they were in power, is they would actually oppress them, because they don't seem to have, they would be in full power. They would have 100% dominance in every single area of success in life, and they would be treating men like shit.
And that would be feminists demonstrating yet another fallacy, projection.
Yeah.
And this is something that's been pointed out numerous times, but I want to point it out again. The vast majority of what feminism says as a movement, what feminism says as an ideology about men is projection. About patriarchy, it's projection. It is what, I mean, if you look at the way women wield the power that women have as a gender, not necessarily individually, because I know that there are, like, I'm talking about the gender as though there are not those of us who are fighting the tide. But the fact is, the majority of the gender wields the social power that we have as a bludgeon to force men to do what they want, to force all of society to cater not just to their needs but to their wants. That's basically what this Pussy Hat March was all about. And it's the same thing as before. Like, the Pussy Hat itself is essentially a demand that women's sensibilities be so coddled that we don't acknowledge that some women are gold diggers who will put up with behavior that they don't like in order to obtain money and status through a man. That's what Trump was actually highlighting when he made that comment. And whether he was making it in seriousness or not, whether he was making it as locker room talk or not, whether he was making it because the conversation had been manipulated that direction or not, it's a true statement. What he said was true. There are women who will let a rich guy do anything he wants. There are women that will let a famous guy do anything he wants. And it's not the rich guy's fault or the famous guy's fault. It's the fact that those women that behave that way want the fame or the money or the recognition, the visibility, the attention, whatever it is that they are after. They want that more than they want to be treated with the type of dignity and respect that women usually demand from ordinary guys.
Bill Burr said. It's like Bill Burr said, I walk off the golf course, I don't have a busload full of Scandinavian women waiting to fuck me, right?
Right.
But Tiger Woods walks off the golf course and he's got like a troop of freaking women running over the hill like Braveheart, right?
Well,
Faces painted, skirts up, ready to jump on his dick right in front of his wife.
Eddie Murphy said it first, I think, before Bill Burr.
Oh, of course.
He made his pussy rant, from Raw, where he was, mimicking walking down the street and catching it as he gets thrown at him. That is just, it's just a fact of life. Because women have that sexual power where they can command attention and resources just by having a pussy, just by being hot. Okay, that's a fact of life. Women who don't do that do not have to be insulted by the fact that it is acknowledged that there are women who do.
Yeah.
Any more than we keep hearing that men are not supposed to be insulted by the acknowledgement that there are men who are violent and that there are men who are sexually violent. Okay, fine. Then feminists can shut the fuck up about the acknowledgement that there are women who are gold diggers. Because that's female dysfunction. They need to shut the fuck up about the acknowledgement that there are women who are sexually violent too, because until that stops, it's going to, the cycle's going to continue with both sexes. But I'm going to go on with more of the super chat. As far as the definition of patriarchy, the answer to the question, how stringent are you with that definition? Very. Because like I said, that is the essence of what feminists who describe patriarchy theory say. You boil everything that they say down to its underlying meaning. That is what that underlying meaning is. So he says, in part 3, he says, using these types only for example, I don't think male supremacists would ever be in a position of any sort of power. And I'm going to agree with that. Using it's feminists talk like everybody wants to bring back a patriarchy that never existed. And they talk as though we're just on the verge of women becoming, literally chattel and so on, right? It's not going to happen. Both sexes are gynocentric. The female victim narrative is used and exploited in the degree and way that it is because it works. So, no, first of all, male supremacists are actually incredibly rare. And second of all, I don't think they would ever be in a position of any sort of power like that. Going on, we have Terry Bull, who gave us $10 and says, "Sup, bros? I'm of the opinion that when feminists talk of voices and bodies, they are objectifying women and victims just as they claim, just as much as they claim so-called bigots do. What do you bros think?" Well, I would say yes. In fact, more
of course,
so.
because it's okay when they do it because they're doing it in the service of women's needs. So
Yep.
there we go. It's not of a selfish sexual claim. It's a no. Look, we're women. We need to have violence against our bodies stopped. So there you go. It's totally different, guys.
We ever notice that when men talk about women as a group and everything, they talk about women. They talk about mothers. They talk about women in the workplace. They talk about what women do and how women are and how women think and so on. And when feminists talk about women, they talk about our genitals, or they talk about the just our physical bodies, or they talk about our voices. They don't talk necessarily about us as whole people. It seems like almost everything feminists say about women, they have a terrible time talking about women as entire people, just segments
just disjointed
of
parts.
existence. Yeah,
It's like when Eve Ensler opened her speech at the 2012 National Organization for Women Conference with the phrase, "Are the vaginas in the house?"
Oh my god!
And everybody cheered, and I'm sitting there going, "What the fuck is going on, and where am I?" And then
super
she yelled,
classy.
"Any vagina-friendly men in the house?" So I'm like, you literally just referred to men as men and women as genitals. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, no
Ensler?
doubt.
So.
You know, that used to be a joke. You know, you start out your opening for your comedy routine, ladies and genitals, ladies and germs, ladies and genitals. No, now it's like the feminist party line. They just,
but only for women.
Yeah. Well, no, they refer to men by body parts as well. They
well, even
that's transphobic.
Eve Ensler didn't. She called them vagina-friendly men.
Right. They were even more irrelevant. But you do hear a lot of feminists basically reducing men to two things: their dicks and their wallets, and that's when they're not reducing them to their fists. And that's like if you took the feminist picture of a man and made a painting of it, it would be a giant cock with two fists and a wallet. And that would be it. There wouldn't be anything left. But yeah, I think feminists pretty much reduce people in exactly the ways that they say that men do.
I think somebody with some artistic talent needs to actually draw the giant cock.
Yes, with two fists.
Brandishing one fist and waving a wallet in the other.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But and honestly, that's like I said, it goes right back to that projection thing. Feminists project more than they ever tell any truth at all. We have Alec Undusco. I hope I'm saying Undusco, saying your name right there, but gave us $10 US. And says, how about how much people will sneer at you if you have the temerity to suggest a prenuptial agreement before you're married? as if that says you don't love your fiance and are not a realist. And that for me, that's a double-edged sword. The biggest problem I see with it is judges ignore them. So yeah, you suggest a prenuptial agreement. You're already acknowledging that maybe you can't trust this person as much as you thought. And to me, the need to suggest a prenuptial agreement indicates that you are getting married too quickly. But I recognize also that society doesn't expect women to maintain the degree of accountability they demonstrate to a man at the beginning of a relationship throughout the relationship. So,
well, and I think also
if she's on her best behavior at the beginning of that relationship and you're really, really certain and you're really, really ready to get married and everything, and then 10 years down the line she turns out to be a lying cunt who cheats on you and runs off with another guy, even if you have a prenuptial agreement, you're fucked. But yeah, you were justified, obviously, in asking for it.
yeah,
But to
well,
me, the fact that they're needed, like, I will underscore this because I think it's very important. It indicates that your engagement is too short.
Well, and also I think that people kind of have this isn't there's sort of a misunderstanding about what a prenuptial agreement often is, because if you have a lot of savings or things like that before the marriage, then fine, I can see it being a good idea. But after you're married, like it's usually accounting for things that you had before the marriage, and the time after you're married, like the things that you accrue after you're married, is that not considered like spousal assets or whatever?
Property, usually.
Exactly. So anything after that, if you've been together for 20 years and you've been accruing all of this together, then the prenuptial agreement is pretty much only going to guarantee you what you had before the marriage, is it not? That was always my understanding of it.
It depends. It depends on what the prenup is and what the prenup says, because that's an individuated contract, right? It's not. Yeah. It's not a standard boilerplate thing, and it can have all kinds of provisions written into it, and
I gotcha.
And all of that. It's sort of like when Muslims contract to marry, they can have all kinds of provisions written in, so long as they're not completely out of line with Sharia, right? But that's an individualized marital contract that they sign, and I think a prenuptial agreement. So essentially, all Muslims who get married the typical way or the traditional way, they all sign a prenuptial agreement, right? And it's almost always heavily in favor of the woman being taken care of if the man fucks off or fucks up, right? It's there's very little in there to protect the man, because the letter of the law gives him a little bit more wiggle room in terms of outs, if he's not happy. But essentially, it's an individual contract, so it's going to differ from person to person, and
fair enough. A
judge will look at that and say, well, these provisions aren't fair, so I'm just going to throw the whole thing out. So, like, honestly, judges can throw them out. Judges can completely disregard them and say this contract is void because of the uneven bargaining power or whatever, right? So, yeah, at this point, it's a silly thing to hold out for because it's not going to do you any good anyway. I would suggest if you wanted to get married and you had assets that you wanted to protect, stick them in a fucking numbered account in a Swiss bank or the Cayman Islands, right? And then get married.
And it's essentially that's your only choice. And even then, if you get caught doing that, a judge can still go after you. Oh, you were hiding assets.
You know, well, if you get caught, yeah. But that's the whole point of.
But yeah, that's the whole point of having a yeah. But the thing is, the underlying problem here is the power that women have, the bazooka that we're not supposed to talk about, right? That a woman can walk into court and make demands, and even the law doesn't get in her way. Even if there's a contract that she signed, a judge can turn around and say, well, that was unfair. It's leaving her in an unfair situation. Even if she cheated, even if she walked away with another guy, even if she was abusive, oh, it was unfair. You have to give her the money. And it's like, why do we even have one group of people, any group of people, that has that kind of power in our legal power in our society? Because we're a gynocentric society. So what it boils down to is the prenup is almost worthless, and I wouldn't rely on one. Instead, I would fight tooth and nail to get rid of the need for them, because the need for them in the first place is the real problem. The fact that uniquely women can walk into court and do that is the underlying problem. Legal reform is needed. Going on, we have Ziranx gave us $5 US and says, matrimony is the celebration of a woman intending to become a mother, etymologically speaking. And I would say, well, yeah, etymologically speaking, that is correct. In terms of actually getting married, in modern times, matrimony is the celebration of a woman taking ownership of a man for as long as she wants. That's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a partnership. It's supposed to be a loving and dedicated partnership. But right now, under the law, under the social circumstances, under the way that you will get treated by your friends and your family and your community, if in any way, shape, or form she becomes dissatisfied with the marriage and decides to complain or walk away, a marriage is a woman taking ownership of a man. And that's the sad reality at this point. And it's why, like I said, prenups are kind of worthless at this point. Flash the Jack gave us $5 US and said, it's anecdotal, but I've seen firsthand my cousins from broken homes turn out awful. The ones like me that came from intact homes turned out way better. Statistically, that's actually backed up. There's a greater likelihood, not necessarily of turning out, I wouldn't say necessarily awful, but there's a greater likelihood of a wide set of dysfunctional behaviors and circumstances that occur if a child is raised without a father. So, yeah, I've seen situations where after divorce, the kids still do okay. I've seen situations where after divorce the kids do great, but those situations usually don't just involve a single mom who goes off and excludes the father entirely from the children's lives and relies on welfare and child support and so on. They usually involve a dedicated family involvement, presence in the children's lives. The father is there. Even if he doesn't live with them, the father is still there. And so it really does boil down to whether kids are allowed access to both of their parents or not. Going on, I gotta scroll through our chatter. Well, Karen was talking about love. Yeah, Prim and I were waxing poetic about our husbands.
Oh yeah, they were all like, no, we're one of the unicorns who actually.
I don't claim to be a unicorn. I think that it's pretty normal. But
we were just talking about how much we love our spouses, and that's super romantic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's
no. I don't believe in happily ever after. What I believe in is striving together to be invested in each other's happiness. And that does make you happy.
My guy can look at me a certain way, and
that's why
it'll still get me. But most of the time, we're like we're like a couple of old socks.
Yeah.
So, you know,
You work together well, right? But
we do.
That's the thing. I like one of the things I said in here is my husband looks me in the eye and he could drop the bottom right out of my stomach, and it's partly just my husband has the steamiest eyes. Like, you guys have no idea, but it's not like the start of a relationship lasts forever. And if you want to have those moments and you want to have those warm fuzzies that as Prim described, that takes work. That takes paying attention to each other and paying attention to what's going on in your relationship and paying attention to your memories of each other, not forgetting who you're with, not forgetting why you're with the person you're with, and so on, what your goals are and everything.
And being aware that they're not going to be there 100% of the time. There will be times where you feel annoyed, and that doesn't mean that you love the person any less.
No, I mean, we've had arguments. We have things that we don't agree on, and we have things that we're very different on. Like, my husband's not political at all. And he doesn't get involved in this stuff, but he doesn't get upset that I do. And there's things that, like, he likes to go and out with friends and see movies and do things and everything, and I'm a homebody. I'm a curl up on the couch with a hot chocolate and a book kind of person. So we have time that we spend apart, where he goes out with some of our friends, and they go to a movie, or they go out to eat, they go hang out at somebody's house or something, and I don't. And you just have to like treat each other like human beings, and like I said, we both look older than we looked when we got married. We've been together for 20 years. We've been married for a large chunk of that. Like, it doesn't matter. The changes don't necessarily detract from that. In fact, just aging together is really kind of, even though aging itself, there's aspects of it that sucks, it's kind of cool to see each other maturing and going through life and changing and developing and everything. I don't know. It just, people don't get that anymore, and it's kind of sad. I'm gonna go on with Observing Libertarians super chat, which I finally scrolled down to. He gave us $10 US and says, "Men are the slave class. We are expected at any and all times to place ourselves in the way or path of absolutely any danger in which any woman within eyeline may be threatened." And that's the point I was making with regard to emotional labor. Women have, for the most part, women have no idea. Moms get a taste of it just in the fact that we do this with our kids, our own kids, and that anytime a child's welfare is in question, the nearest mom and gets asked and stuff like that. But that's just with regard to kids, and it's not anywhere near on the level that I've watched happen with the men around me. And there was that incident at the Aurora Theater, the hell that the guy went through, that thought his fiance was with him when he ran, for not basically taking a bullet for her because 3 other guys did. That's characteristic of, it's not necessarily always at that extreme level, but it's characteristic of the attitude that society imposes on men. And I never go anywhere with guys anymore because of that incident and because of other things that I've experienced in my life, without being aware that if I do something stupid that puts me in danger, it puts them in danger too, because of that phenomenon, that what they are taught and what they are expected to live up to. And I think a lot of women don't get it. They don't realize that. And that's a huge amount of emotional labor to put on somebody.
Oh my God.
I just, like the one day I was at the store, I gotta tell this because it just blows my mind still. I almost hit a chick that walked out in front of my van with her face an inch away from her stupid smartphone. And her guy grabbed her and pulled her back at just the last minute. Like, she just walked right out in front of me. I didn't even have enough room to have stopped if I had, slammed on my brakes as I was on my way out of the parking lot. And she got mad at him. Like, he just kept her from getting hit by a several 100-pound object moving at 15 miles an hour. And she got mad at him because he grabbed her and yanked her. He was the one holding the kid's hands. He was the one looking around for traffic. He was the one paying attention. She just had her face in her fucking phone. And he was the bad guy because he saved her sorry ass. Emotional labor.
You want to know what's hilarious? My guy, he used to work graveyards and bakery way years ago. And one night he went and stopped and got a coffee at a Tim Hortons near where he worked. And he ran into his cousin. His cousin, she's about, 5 years younger than him. And they got, she was having a cigarette out in the parking lot. And he stood out there and chatted with her for a bit. And then she notices that further out into the parking lot, there's a Ford Escalade, like a Cadillac or whatever, one of those like super, super nice SUVs. Parked, and there's a couple of guys, and they're like roughing up these two dudes who look like they're in high school. And he immediately thinks, okay, these are drug dealers, and they're mules or whatever, right? And they're roughing them up. They want their money, blah blah blah. And they just don't look, don't pay attention, just leave it alone, right? She notices. And she immediately starts screaming, "Hey, you stop that. You have no right to put your hands on another person, blah, 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 blah." Right? So these two guys, right, these two huge guys, enforcers, come walking up, and they're not looking at her. She's still yelling at them, right? And they're not looking at her. They're looking at my boyfriend, right? And they say to him, "Control your woman." And he's like, "I got nothing to do with her." Right? And they're reaching into their coats, right? And they're still looking at him. And she's still screaming at these guys. Like, she has no idea that she's about to get my boyfriend stabbed, her cousin stabbed, right? She has no fucking clue. She thinks that she has the right to upbraid a couple of fucking criminals, a couple of felons, violent fucking felons, right? She can just tell them what to do, how to behave. She can like rip a strip off of them in the middle of doing business, and she's going to face no consequences. And the thing is, if she'd been standing alone in that parking lot, she wouldn't have opened her mouth. Okay? But if she'd been standing alone in that parking lot and she had opened her mouth, dog, you're not part of this conversation. If she had opened her mouth alone in the parking lot, they wouldn't have done anything. They would have seen her as just some harmless, stupid cunt, okay, who's mouthing off, and they wouldn't have done nothing. They would have given her the finger, told her to fuck off, and gone about their business, right? She was never in any danger, right? But because my guy, her cousin, was standing next to her, dog, shut up. Because he was standing next to her, she felt safe enough to spew all this shit, right? And then she put him in this incredible amount of danger by doing that. And I'm just I'm just looking at it going, what the fuck was she thinking? And then, so we brought it up a couple of weeks later when we were all together with the extended family, and he mentioned it, and then she's like, "Oh, I was just so furious. I just couldn't help myself." And I almost punched her in the fucking face. I was just like, you couldn't help yourself?
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for your bullshit? Not you.
Oh, my God.
Learn some self-control right
you
there.
Stupid cunt.
I learned that lesson in high
fuck.
school. I learned it the hard. I got in a fight with Like I used to have this habit, right, of not dating by not dating. It's just a thing. And so there was this guy that I was not dating. Like we went everywhere together. We hung out all the time. We talked and shit like that all the time. And I wasn't allowed to go out with anybody else. And you know, and like he did. But in any case, it was, you know, not dating. Got in a fight with him, and he shoved me because I got in his face, and it was really it was really stupid. I was very aggressive over something that, had I taken the time to think about it, even as a stupid 17-year-old, I would have known better than to be aggressive over that, because it wasn't rational at all. It was a very irrational moment. But in any case, like, you know, he pushed me away, and that was in public. So all of the guys in my class knew about it. All of the football players that I did photography at my school, as I like 90% of the pictures probably that were not the school pictures in my senior yearbook were pictures I shot. And so like I was always on the field with these guys, and you know, they were asking me where he lived and all kinds of stuff, and I realized all of them felt like they had to step up and do something about this guy, quote, hitting me. And I had hit him back, and it was like the fight was 2 hits. He shoved me, and I slammed him into the lockers, and then he realized he hit a girl in front of everybody and stopped. And I stormed off like a stupid little bitch. And oh no, it was really, really teenage angsty, stupid shit. My brother had to beat him up. It was required. It was not something that he had, like, yeah, he had a choice in it, but socially he didn't.
Yeah.
And it was, he didn't want to do that. That wasn't his, he didn't act like that. That wasn't his thing, going around beating people up. Like, he got into fights. Kids get into fights, you know. And the guys in my neighborhood used to fight for fun, but it was play fighting. It wasn't, you know, kill each other and wipe the floor with each other. And my brother had to, he really had to kick this guy's ass. And it was a rotten deal for both of them, obviously. And it really wasn't the guy's fault. You know, and it was, the whole thing was based on a stupid prank that another girl was playing on me. Put a fake note in my locker and everything. It was really dumb. But I learned that if I get involved in violence that involves a guy, that automatically is going to get any guy who is is remotely invested in my welfare, or any guy who is taught to be a protector of girls, involved. And he's going to have to be involved in violence because of me. That was a hard lesson to learn, but it was a fact, and it's still a fact. And it's something that I think a lot of, like I said, a lot of gals don't understand that. They don't understand that sticking their nose in someplace like that gets guys involved in violence, because those guys are expected or required to be invested in a woman's welfare and to sacrifice for it.
Which is stupid, because I mean, I think that we can all sacrifice for each other if we were just not stupid about things. Like, there was this one time in, I believe, grade 7 or grade 8, where I had a really close guy friend who was being picked on by a group of guys, and being led by this one girl in a posse. And I walked up and I went straight over to her and I smacked her across the face, because I'm like, stop picking on my friend, you asshole. I'm not necessarily saying that was the best way of handling the situation, but I mean, it worked. It got her and her posse of dudes to piss off already and stop pestering my friend. But it's just silly that it should be expected that men protect women, and it's not just we protect each other from threats outside of us. You know, it's just not fair.
Hello?
Hello.
Sorry. For some reason,
Were you
my
muted?
mute button had a little bit. I heard it just pop. I have to use the button on my mic because of the dynamics between OBS and the overlay that I have to use with Discord and so on. Otherwise, I have to use like 3 or 4 different mutes in order to mute everything. So if I just mute this, but for some reason it just didn't. But no, anyway, I was going to say, gonna go on to the next super chats. But before that, I was going to say, it used to be that women were expected to reciprocate that protection. It wasn't necessarily always physical, but women at one point in history were expected to at least stand up for the men around them, the men who were part of their circle of life, their sphere of life. But now it's not so much, and I think we need to get back to that. Let's see.
Chris Stewart is the next one.
See, did I read the Chris Stewart one? No, I didn't read the Chris Stewart
No.
one. So
This is the
Observing
update.
Libertarian was last. Okay, so Chris Stewart gave us $10 and said, actually, Karen, you're wrong about the topping from the bottom bit. You know, male feminists, or at least the stereotype, these women use the exact same rhetoric, but gender flipped and with better porn.
Oh, you're so
God.
dominant. Oh, just take me now.
Yeah,
but
that's still topping from the bottom. It's it's still psychological manipulation. And
male feminists think that they can do that, but they can't. These women, like if they're longing for a return to a patriarchal type of thing, or that if that's what they want, it's because they know that there is a certain amount of female power that has been ceded to, like, essentially they because pussy is not rare, it's not expensive anymore, it's, like there's all kinds of changes that have happened that where women have actually lost a certain amount of power to dictate things with men that they have not legally entrapped. So as long as you are not legally bound to these women in some way, as long as the state isn't going to step in and do anything, they don't have the kind of power that they would like to have, and that they probably would have had, back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. So, yeah.
The next one, hopefully I don't butcher this, because I don't know what background it's from, but Saren Gassé gave us US $10 and said, I always thought a good woman ran shit, but had the man convinced it was his doing. A lot of women believe that, actually, and it's kind of I would say it's a dumb belief. A good woman and a good man partner up and they work together as a team, and each one of them draws on their own strengths and their partner's strengths, and each one of them makes up for their partner's weaknesses and surrenders their weaknesses so that their partner can make up for it, and can recognize, like I can recognize that my husband's bigger and stronger than me, and I don't always have to open the pickle jar myself, and I can also recognize that there are things he knows that I don't. And so if I'm, bullheaded about wanting to do something and he says, well, wait, don't do that, I'm going to ask him, what's going on, instead of being like, hey, don't you tell me what to do. You can't tell me what to do just because I'm a girl. And he does the same thing with me. There's stuff that I know that he hasn't. There's experiences that I've had growing up that he didn't, or that I learned about just from having a family full of people involved in medicine. That I'm aware of these things because they were practiced at home, because you take your work home with you. And so sometimes where he hasn't thought something was serious, I've said, no, we're going to the doctor now. And he doesn't argue with me because I know something he doesn't. So that's just the way you work. This idea of the woman running shit and having the man convinced it's his idea, that's just manipulative bullshit. And women who act like that there's women who say it jokingly, yeah, it's funny, haha. But women who really act like that, they're assholes. Don't marry an asshole. Exploding Prinny gives us $5 and says, perhaps the goal of modern feminism is to get the patriarchy to destroy itself. Much less work involved that way, dude. No. Modern feminism exploits the thing that they consider to be the patriarchy more than any other group. They're not trying to get it to destroy itself. Excuse me, they're part of it. They use it. There isn't anything that you can name that has been achieved that gets attributed to feminism. There isn't any goal of feminism, any stated goal of feminism that has been met that they have done without appealing to men to do it for them. Not one thing. Feminism is just another arm of its own patriarchal theories. That's all they are. Redneck Ram's Parlor. Redneck Ram's Parlor. I'm not dyslexic. I just play one on Honey Badger Radio. Redneck Ram's Parlor gave us $20 US and said, I have to disagree about getting married too soon. Assuming I ever would have anyone to marry, I've already decided she must sign a prenup because I'll be damned if I let her take my family land from me.
Well, that's what I was saying, right? Like, if you have a lot of stuff beforehand, then I can definitely understand it a lot more because you want to have that sort of thing protected, of course.
Yeah, the problem is, like I said, a judge can turn around and invalidate the prenup. And the problem is, no matter how secure you feel in that prenup, it is as valuable as a restraining order. It's just a piece of paper. In fact, it's less, because a restraining order, at least if someone violates a restraining order, the cops will come and put them in jail for it.
Yeah.
But if a judge invalidates a prenup, you got nothing. So I'm going to go back to really vet a woman before you saddle yourself with a relationship, much less a marriage. Period. Really take the time to vet that woman's character. Don't get married to a woman you wouldn't go into business with. Even if you don't think she has great business sense, don't get married to a woman you wouldn't go into business with because you don't trust not just her judgment, but her integrity. Marry a woman with integrity if you're going to get married. And you vet a woman for integrity the same way you would vet another man for integrity. If a behavior that a woman engages in, if you wouldn't trust a guy again after he did that, then she just told you can't trust her. Period. End of story. Even if there are prenuptial agreements. And I'm not saying never have a prenuptial agreement. What I'm saying is don't make it your only insurance policy. Because it's not that good of an insurance policy.
Yeah.
R3 Psyche gave us $10 and said, the nihilistic pursuit of fleeting joy is much easier than accepting the full spectrum of experience, even though the latter is far more rewarding. I wish this idea was promoted more in popular culture.
The only thing that's getting promoted these days is emotional labor.
Emotional labor.
Emotional labor.
So if you go through enough emotional labor, do you give birth to baby feels?
Maybe.
Self-sealing stem bolt gave us €2 and said, I love the dog translation. Then we have scrolling through our chat, in which I say, I have to work tonight. Cy Berserk gave us sex. Woohoo!
Thanks for the sex.
Gave us 20 sex
20
and
sex.
didn't say anything. Apparently.
Yeah, it was very quiet sex.
Yeah.
Well, he gave us more sex later.
I don't do that. Anyway, Chris Stewart gave us $10 US and said, fair enough point on the male feminist, Karen. Still, I don't think that 50s are what they want. Too sex negative for those types. Not enough gangbangs. Remember, kinkier and better porn.
Yeah, except for that the 50s is probably exactly what they want, because that would make everything that they're doing just extra titillating.
Oh, hey, it wasn't a dyslexic moment. It was a typo. Chris Stewart gave us another $2 and says, Kinkster,
not kicker.
I'm looking at that and I'm like, I really see kicker, and I know he probably meant kinkier.
Well, Cyberberg gives us
more
200 sex.
Yeah, there we go.
Now I really feel good. Once as a young guy, I felt smickered when a lot of girls were trying to hook up with me when I was working as a doorman, but I soon found out they just wanted to have a bodyguard when breaking up with their boyfriend.
Oh,
God, that's... I wish I could say that was not typical, but unfortunately, that's typical. I hang out with a lot of guys that are much bigger than me, and I noticed that you go out places, historically I've noticed, I should say, because I don't really do a lot of going out now, but girls will attach themselves to this guy's side because he's big, and they don't want to deal with other people, so they go hang out with the big guy.
There was one woman, and she's a sweetheart, who was telling me how she met her husband. This is a friend of my mom's. She's younger than my mom. Her husband was my dad's apprentice when my dad was a master mechanic. But she said that she met her husband one night at a dance when this guy just would not stop hitting on her and would not stop asking her to dance. And she kept on saying, no, 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 I have a boyfriend, but she didn't. And then she looked and she saw this guy who was just sitting there, and he looked nice enough. And she went over and sat on his lap and put her arms around his neck and said to him, just pretend you're my boyfriend, and gave him a kiss. And that was how they met. So
yeah, jeez, that's funny. If that had been the other way around, it would have been.
Oh, of course, of course.
I had to get a restraining order against a guy.
When you hear it in this context, it's like, oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah,
right?
but
it turned out. But then again, I did have an uncle who chased his future wife down with the city bus after repeatedly asking her out and her saying no because she was a passenger on his bus regularly. And she kept on saying no, and then finally one day she got off the bus and instead of he just, with a bus full of people, mind you, he drove after her and chased her down, and then he parked the bus and he ran out and he chased her, and he got on his knee and said, "Go out with me." And then she said, "Okay." And then he got back on the bus with all of these people who were all weirded out. And then she said she'll go out with me, and they were all like, "Yay!" and applauded.
So stories like that are adorable. Then if you look at them through the feminist lens, it's like, oh God, that's so creepy. My grandparents are like that too.
Chased me with a bus.
Technically, the way they got together would be considered workplace harassment. My grandfather was my grandmother's patient, and it was a horrible situation. This really romantic story starts out with this really awful experience. Grandpa worked for Chicago Bridge and Iron, and he had a big concrete drum, like they put in drainage ditches, dropped on him from a fairly high height, and it broke his leg in multiple places, crushed his ankle. He was in traction for months, and Grandma was the nurse that took care of him part of the time, and he started flirting with her and everything, and it took him the whole time he was in the hospital to win her over just to going out with him. And today that would be considered harassment.
Massive breach of ethics.
Yeah, massive breach of ethics that she went out with the patient, and a massive engagement of workplace harassment because she had to be there, and here was this guy. Now, my grandparents were a very handsome couple. Grandpa's very debonair, really knew how to, you would call him metro today, I guess. But, and Grandma modeled hats for Saks Fifth Avenue when they lived in New York. But so they were both very attractive people, and they were both very attracted to each other. But yeah, she started out with, oh no, I couldn't do that. Oh, I absolutely couldn't do that. That wouldn't be okay, And in the end, they went out and they got married, and they were married for 50 years. They were married until she passed away, and he didn't have another relationship after she passed away. And he lived 10 years after she passed away, didn't have another relationship. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. And, but yeah, there's a lot of people getting together that's definitely, it wouldn't be approved by feminists at all. They would definitely call it violence. In any case, we are at the end of the super chats and the end of the show. And
we only got through one point in the entire list.
Yeah, I know. We're probably gonna be doing this for 6 weeks.
We suck so bad.
Like I said,
I know.
This is the end. And as I said last week, I'm gonna go on to the last shill now. My mind was blown when upon witnessing legal tolerance for women's perjury and intimate partner violence cases against my friends, and I realized how much society condones lies perceived to benefit women. And lies perceived to benefit women have been exploited by political groups for decades to push for law, policy, and social changes that benefit professional ideologues at everyone's expense, and especially at men's expense. The more power and money they receive, the more male-demonizing, female-infantilizing lies they spout, and the more irrational they become. What do you do when you're dealing with such an obvious lack of logic? It is as if the person has just vomited up a huge mass of bullshit, and there you are, up your knees in it. Disgusted, discouraged, and desperately trying to figure out how you're going to get it out of your socks. It's not even good compostable shit. It doesn't foster anything productive. Nothing can grow where independent thought, logic, and reason are not permitted to exist. So, what is to be done? First need is a shovel, a tool to dig through it and find your way back to solid ground. I want people empowered to fight back against tolerance for lies, the myths that are promoted and protected by that tolerance, and the demands that are made based on those myths. In particular, I want people armed with the tools they need to fight back against women's lies, men being blamed for those lies, and demands placed on men as a result of that blame, to provide our listeners with the tools to dig out of the bullshit, maybe even get the people around them questioning, why are we tolerating this shit? I want people aware that they don't have to tolerate a damn thing, because right here we have a whole shed full of tools to work our way through all of it, clean it out of the discussion, and get on with our advocacy. Most of all, I want men who can assert their own truth without fear of the lies society facilitates women telling. If that sounds like something that you want to see more of, then please consider supporting my efforts in arming fighters, and support the Badgers at feedthebadger.com. And with that, I would like to thank everybody who listened. I would like to thank my co-hosts and everyone who helps make Honey Badger live streams happen. Thank you all, and good night.